look at that, folks. Wouldn't you know, we finally got our first good episode of the season. Was it the best episode of Doctor Who ever? No. Was it in the top S tier, A tier level of Doctor Who? We'll get to that. We'll get to that. This felt like a classic Russell T Davies era Moffat story. Back in the day when he would only grace us with one or two gems that were the highlight of the season. He gave us Blink. He gave us The Empty Child. He gave us Silence in the Library, Force of the Dead. And I feel like he was back in that gear for this. It felt very nostalgia-inducing in a lot of ways just because it harkened back to when Doctor Who was good. Okay, so let's dive into the story. Let's talk about it. I love the way it opens. It opens on this eerie, desolate, war-ravaged planet in a misty fog. It's actually very reminiscent to me of a lot of old classic Doctor Who stories that started out in a mysterious quarry. You know, Genesis of the Daleks springs to mind. The image of the blindfolded soldier wandering across the foggy battlefield is a perfect visual metaphor for the themes of the story that is about to unfold. We are introduced to the ambulances, which bear a very familiar face on them. I don't know if you noticed. We also witness the other soldier step on a landmine and explode in a very creepy and odd way. It's some good foreshadowing for what's about to occur. After the blind soldier gets obliterated by the ambulance, the doctor hears his cry and, staying true to form, runs out to see if anyone needs help. He, of course, immediately steps on a landmine himself, and the telltale green lights begin to light up as we cut to the opening credits. This is a killer opener for this episode, as it really hooked you in and pulled you into the story. How's he going to get out of this one? When we cut back from the credits, the episode continues to set its somber, eerie tone that it's established from the start. As Ruby wanders out into the mist, following the spooky voice of the Doctor singing. She discovers him, and they have this amazing back and forth, with the Doctor just barely holding it together. Ncudi's performance is riveting, as he teeters between losing his cool and attempting to be the calm, controlled presence that he needs to be in this moment, while also trying to maintain some sort of level of authority with Ruby to direct her and get her to help him to escape this predicament without endangering herself too much. We rarely see the Doctor this vulnerable and fearing for his life, so that ratchets up the tension very effectively. You know, oftentimes the Doctor is kind of cavalier with the villains or dangerous situations that he finds himself in, and he can come off at times as somewhat invulnerable, especially with his functionally immortal, barring any major accidents, regeneration ability that he has. And that's what makes this episode so effective, because as the Doctor makes very clear, he might be a next dimensional being and all that, but if he gets blown away on a cellular level, he's not coming back. That is an accident he cannot walk away from. So the danger is very real. Ncuti gives a raw and completely convincing performance. The kind of performance that puts doctors on awards lists.
It's just adrenaline rush. Just gotta control it. It's going down, down, it's moving down, sliding down.
Millie Gibson holds her own as well, giving just the right mix of bravery, concern, and repressed terror as she rebels against the Doctor and steps closer to him in order to increase his chances of survival at the risk of decreasing her own. I like how prickly the banter gets between the Doctor and Ruby during this sequence. With the situation so dangerous and intense, a bit of the easygoing facade drops away.
I need to increase the weight on the mine at the exact moment I decrease it.
But it's gonna be tricky.
It's gonna be a moment, yeah?
You know, for this entire series, these two characters have just been so happy-go-lucky together. They've been bouncing around, having adventures, not really having any sort of friction or arguments about anything. So to see them actually kind of butt heads on such a serious and huge issue gives them a lot of depth. I feel like these two characters feel more real and human in this episode than they have for the entire series so far. Side note, the smelting of the humans into those tube things is a great piece of creepy body horror. Like it's a disturbing idea, and the visual of it is just so gross. It's really off-putting the way it's this fleshy but like hardened, smooth surface. It's just a mishmash of organs and skin and eyeballs and ears. It's so gross and creepy and horrifying. So that's great. I'm all down for the body horror in Doctor Who. Most of the time.
At least I'll never age.
The tension just continues to escalate and ramp up throughout this episode as one problem after another just seems to find its way to the exact location where the Doctor is standing on a mine. And what the nice thing is it doesn't seem like it comes out of thin air. It's really very well laid out and sequenced in the story. It all makes sense. The father was out blind in the battlefield for too long. He was talking to his daughter, but he hadn't come back yet when he said he was. The daughter's concerned, so she asked Mundy to come out to go find him, and she goes out to go find him as well. So they're both looking for this guy, which means they would be looking in the area that he was in, and they would find the doctor and Ruby and end up there. So this is a fairly airtight story, logic-wise, compared to the entire rest of the season, and a lot of other Doctor Who episodes, even other Moffat episodes that I really love. It seems like he really thought out the logistics and the little nitty-gritty details to get everyone where they needed to be when they needed to be there in a fairly organic manner. Splice eventually shows up, the little girl who is the daughter of the slain blind soldier. This is where the first flaws of the episode come in. Not major flaws, but there are flaws, and unfortunately this little girl is part of it. I'm not going to harp on her performance too much because she's a child actor and they're still learning, they're still young, it's not their fault, and they can only do so well if they're given really weird dialogue to work with. Really, I think a big problem was her acting partner a lot of time was a invisible hologram who wasn't there, and she was also tasked with doing some of the most bizarre and unusual actions in the course of the story. I think one of the clunkiest moments in the episode where the stage direction just seemed to sort of fall apart was when Ruby and Mundy were arguing about what to do about the doctor, and the AI father just popped up like a kind of Facebook style, hey, remember these, like photos of the past? And she just became enraptured with the photos, and she sits down and she's staring at the photos, and she's like, oh, that's when we saw the antelopes, and like people are screaming about the mine that's going to blow everyone up like 3 feet away from her. That was awkward and felt weird, and it kind of just felt like the writer was like, okay, the little girl's here, but I want to shift her to the side and out of the scene for a while so these adults can actually have a scene. So we'll just put her in the corner with some photos. It'll be fine for like a few minutes. It's not a big deal. It feels very awkward and weird. And by the way, this is fairly minor. Like the character didn't ruin the story. These few clunky moments didn't ruin the episode. They just brought it down a little bit. You know what I mean? Mundy is an interesting character. She comes off likable at first. She has a nice rapport with the little girl. She's willing to help the little girl out. She has an awkward romance or unrequited love thing going on with her soldier friend. It's a nice way to establish that she's not a bad person when you first meet her. So when she does all the terrible stuff, like a scene later, you don't completely hate her. Because she is pretty bad when she first interacts with the doctor. She doesn't seem to care about him. She's just giving him up for dead already. She shoots the doctor to get him to drop the thing and explode. It's pretty cold-blooded, really. She's also a religious zealot, part of some sort of military crusade, which is, really gross and terrible. Apparently they just go into planets and announce they're there and start shooting. The big element of the story is the pitfalls of being blindly faithful to anything, to just believing that what you're doing is true and right without looking into it and investigating. The romance between her and her friend is cute and charming and very humanizing, and I actually like all their back and forths. Unfortunately, they choose a really terrible time to have their heart-to-heart. They decide to have their "do you like me, I like you" conversation in the middle of the guy trying to reprogram an ambulance robot to save the life of the woman he just shot. Seems like an awkward time. Seems like all attention and focus should be on fixing that machine and not breaking down your unrequited love relationship with your friend right at that moment.
How's it going?
There are safeguards, hush.
It seems like a thing Doctor Who's been doing more and more often recently. It actually reminds me a lot of that Yaz and Doctor heart-to-heart during that Sea Devils episode, where they confessed their love to one another, which was really sweet, but unfortunately they chose a time where it ended up costing a man his life. This was a similar situation, unfortunately. We ended up with a dead friend who was talking, but he was actually dead. Just an AI or computer ghost echo of his former self, which is an extremely Moffat thing to do, and I approve.
I'm fine. How are you?
Hey, who turned out the lights?
The episode just so effectively builds the tension pretty much from beginning all the way to the end, layering one crisis on top of another in like a nonstop stream, almost too fast for the Doctor to keep up with. He steps on a landmine, and then a little girl wants to have a fight with Ruby right by the landmine, and then a soldier shows up and shoots him to try to get him to drop a thing so he'll blow up, and then his friend gets shot in front of him. Ruby gets shot right before his eyes, and he still has to maintain his calm. It's insane. The levels of zen this man must possess. The idea that he will blow up half the planet is cool, because it's a very specific thing. It's a bomb that goes into you and explodes you on a cellular level. I like the idea that he is a higher dimensional being, as he put it, whose cellular makeup could destroy half a planet if it's blown up in this way. This episode, while at the same time it breaks the Doctor down to his most vulnerable and mortal, it also reminds us that he is this all-powerful, other-dimensional, crazy alien. The moment where Ruby gets shot is a great moment. It's a great twist. It works really well because it perfectly pulls together all the threads of the story, all the bits of technobabble and information and cultural stuff and the way the ambulances work. That one soldier's hidden love for Mundi, it all just comes together in this beautiful, terribly tragic way as he shoots down Ruby and she brutally ragdolls down the side of a cliff. I thought that shot was really intense. Like, it felt very gritty and real. It was more realistic and gritty than what Doctor Who has been like for the season so far, and I really appreciated it. That reminded me a lot of like Tom Baker era or some David Tennant, Christopher Eccleston type of episodes where they weren't afraid to make it feel a little more dark and adult. In the end, it's revealed that the reason the soldiers are fighting an unseen enemy and are swapping ghost stories and rumors about the enemy being in the fog or being in the mud is because, in fact, the soldiers are fighting themselves, killing each other to keep the gravy train running for the subtly named Villain Guard. This is very overtly and bluntly criticizing the military-industrial complex that our planet is unfortunately beholden to. It calls out that war makes money for people, so people have a vested interest in creating war, which is the reality of the world we live in today. I feel like the reveal works because of the generally well-thought-out world building that Moffat has done throughout the course of this episode. My mind did go into logical dissonance mode for a second as I started trying to figure out how the hell would soldiers not know there was no one there and be shooting and killing each other? Like, how is that possible? And my brain started to process through it, like how illogical Space Babies or The Devil's Cord is, if you think of it beyond the surface level. But then I remembered everything the story had said, and it actually checked out for the most part in the end. The fact that there are killer ambulances, migrating landmines, and apparently this company, Villain Guard, supplies and outfits all of the military forces throughout the universe at this time, so the enemy forces could easily have the exact same equipment as your army. And finally, the blind, unquestioning religious faith of this particular army, which means they don't question authority and they just follow their orders. So when you put all that together, it does make it at least plausible that they would be unaware that they were fighting a war against themselves, essentially. Because they aren't even really fighting a war against themselves. They're being gaslit into fighting a war where they are being systematically killed by machines that are running an evil algorithm. So they're really fighting the machines. So all those elements together make the twist reveal plausible enough to me. Plausible by Who standards, I guess you could say. The villains also traffic in the oft-repeated phrase, thoughts and prayers. Often a politician will give their thoughts and prayers as a sort of lip service to acknowledge and then brush aside some terrible tragedy that they may or may not have had a hand in. I remember this phrase getting a lot of ridicule and heat about a decade ago, so it's not the freshest take, but it still holds true. Still holds true to this day, and it works in this context and with this particular film. Eagle-eyed viewers, well, actually, maybe not eagle-eyed because they make it incredibly obvious and in your face in this episode, so eyed viewers may have noticed a familiar face. That's right, it's Susan Twist, reappearing for her 4th time in 4 episodes. This time she is the face of the evil AI run by Villain Guard, which is a change for her because in the other 3 episodes so far she's appeared as either a benign civilian or a, apparently good person for the brief moments that we get to see her. This is the first time she's appeared in a villainous role, which is interesting. Now, of course, this version of this person in this universe could have just easily been a very kind-hearted actor who just was hard up for money and decided to lend their likeness to this giant company to do their ambulances, not knowing that the ambulances were actually murder machines. We don't know, but it does cast the character in a more mysterious and potentially sinister light. In the end, the AI/human soul infused father saves the day by pulling off the most techie-wecky thing that I think could happen on Doctor Who. This makes reversing the polarity of the neutron flow sound positively sane and logical compared to what happens here. So AI human soul hybrid daddy travels into the Doctor through his pupils, out through a medical syringe, through the wires of the medical syringe, and into the ambulance robot, and then breaks into the connected mainframe of the entire robot system and shuts it all down through the power of love. it does thematically tie into the fact that he was unjustly murdered by this system, and now he's come for revenge and to protect his daughter. So, it all ties together well enough. It is very fantastical, but I'm okay with it because at least they presented all the pieces to put it together at the end. The final scene is really very touching and beautiful. The Doctor and Millie both reflecting on the nature of faith and death after having closer than usual brushes with death themselves in this story. And it just ends on a really nice note. I love the beautiful sunrise landscape, the gorgeous CGI sky. They leave these people with a new sense of freedom and hope and possibility. And it ends on that one mysterious snowflake, which I didn't really talk about that much in this episode, but that's in there. That's happening too. Intriguing. Oh, one other thing about a character in this episode. Now, before I talk about that character, I just want to give a warning, a mild spoiler warning. This is only a spoiler if you're somebody who doesn't follow Doctor Who news at all, because this was publicly announced by Doctor Who. However, I'm sure a lot of you folks out there are not religiously following the Doctor Who news pipeline and just casually enjoying the show. And if so, I honestly think that the thing that they released is kind of lame and spoilery, and I wish I didn't know about it, which is often the case with Doctor Who. Looking at you, season 10, and thank you very much. So if you don't want to be spoiled, you can just skip ahead to my final remarks at this time code. This time, I think I put something right here-ish. I don't know. So, but just skip to this time and you'll avoid the spoiler. All right, I'll give you a moment here. Go ahead, fumble around, unpause your phone, hit the pause, you take your earbuds out, whatever you got to do. Okay, you got it? You're good? You're good? Okay, I'm going to say it now. So Monday, played by Varada Sethu, made a surprise appearance in this episode. She was announced as the Doctor's new second companion for his upcoming season 2, which they're already filming right now. So it's very surprising and odd to see her popping up so early in season 1 here. What does that mean? How is she going to become reintegrated in the story later down the road? No idea, but I just thought I'd mention that. That's very shocking and kind of exciting. It reminds me a lot of when Clara popped up early in season 7. The joke that the Doctor made about how Sunday and Monday need to get married, he'd laugh every day. That's possibly foreshadowing. I don't know. Is anyone already shipping these two? Yeah, but that's all I got to say about that. I just thought it was kind of cool and interesting, and I'd call it out, so it's in the video. All right, now on to my final thoughts. This was hands down the best episode of the season by a country mile. It was really fun. It was cool. It was an amazing acting showcase for Ncuti Gatwa especially, and for Millie Gibson. It had a cool setting. It had a good anti-war message that I agree with, on a broad scale. It didn't go super deep, but what it did discuss and the concepts it did play with, the idea of blind faith and capitalism, funding war, are interesting concepts that he just sort of puts out there and plays around with a bit and leaves you with stuff to chew on and think about afterwards. It had a few rough or awkward and clunky moments, just a few minor awkward moments, mainly involving some weird staging and some clunky dialogue. But for the most part, this flowed really smoothly, had a very strong cast, was logically consistent for the most part by Doctor Who standards, and just had a good eerie vibe to it. It was the kind of story that I like. A cool sci-fi concept and a spooky, gothic, gloomy, adult atmosphere. That being said, it's not the best episode ever. It's just a really, really good episode. I still take into account the whole 60 years and especially the past 20 years or so with the modern series. Is this episode as amazing as, say, Blink, or Human Nature, or Heaven Sent, something like that? No. But it is really good. It's a really solid Moffat story. So I give it a B+. Didn't quite crack the A's. I was playing with the idea of an A-. I did really love Ncuti's performance, and I like a lot of things about the episode, but I don't find myself being as enamored or wowed as I have been in the past. And maybe that's really not fair at all, because I've been watching the series for years now, and it takes increasingly higher thresholds of wowness to wow me in the show that's wowed me so often. You know what I'm saying? I said wow too much. But at the end of the day, very strong B+. Very strong B+. And who knows? I'm going to do an end of the year appraisal of the whole season. I'm going to rank everything. I'm going to reevaluate and potentially regrade the stories in the end after it sat in my head and cooked for a little while. I would love it if the rest of the season was like this. I know it's not going to be like that. I'm very certain this season is going to be an insane grab bag where they're just throwing everything at the wall, and every episode is a wildly different tone and vibe, which I'm, intrigued by. But at the end of the day, like, just make these episodes good. Just make them better than they were at the start. Those first 2 episodes, they felt very lazy in their writing and kind of crazy in their execution. And I didn't feel like that was the best foot forward. This should have been like, I'm going to probably recommend to people, if the season's worth watching at the end, because it may not be, then I will recommend it to people, but I will tell them to start with this episode. Or maybe start with The Church on Ruby Road and then skip to this episode. And then if you really are loving it, watch those other 2. But like, don't start with Space Babies. Just whatever you do, don't start with Space Babies. Every episode now, okay, next episode, I'm not going to mention Space Babies at the end, okay? I'm not going to mention it. Next week looks kind of interesting. It looks like another horror-tinged, more grounded episode, and I'm really looking forward to that. But yeah, in the end, this episode was great. Next episode looks interesting. The show may be heading for an upswing in quality. Fingers crossed. So, I guess we'll see next week. Until next time, Kay, signing out.